Welcome to the Drum Shuffle, a podcast offering insights, perspectives, and conversations for drummers. I'm your host, Jamie Eads.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Drum Shuffle. Jamie Eads joining you as I do each and every week. This is episode number 123. I hope all of you guys are having a great week out there. We're having a good week over here at the Drum Shuffle World Headquarters. Have just a wonderful episode today. We are joined by a friend of the show. The great Steve Barney from over in the UK is going to be joining us right after this message from our sponsor, Los Cabos Drumsticks.
The best kept secret for drummers is finally out. Los Cabos Drumsticks may look like the sticks you grew up with, but these are not your father's drumsticks. Los Cabos Drumsticks is Canada's #1 drumstick brand, and they are coming to a retailer near you. With operations in over 28 countries worldwide, thousands of drummers have already discovered the Los Cabos difference. Using FSC certified wood from Canada and the US, Los Cabos make the finest quality drumsticks, percussion tools, and accessories on the market. The best news, Los Cabos Drumsticks offers you a ton of choice. They have 22 individual drumstick models and 14 percussion tools, many of which are available in 3 different wood types: maple, white hickory, and red hickory. Red hickory comes from the center or heart of the hickory tree and has been independently proven to be both stronger and more elastic than white hickory without adding a lot of weight. While most drumstick manufacturers have shunned red hickory, Los Cabos Drumsticks has embraced it, becoming the only established stick brand in the world to offer a full line of red hickory drumsticks. To learn more about Los Cabos Drumsticks, visit them online at loscabosdrumsticks.com, follow them on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and don't forget to ask for Los Cabos Drumsticks at your favorite retailer. Dare to be different. Join the Red Hickory Revolution with Los Cabos Drumsticks.
All right, guys and girls, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be joined today by the great Steve Barney. Steve first appeared on my radar back in 2003, I want to say. He did a record with Jeff Beck. And I was unfamiliar with his name. And of course, everybody knows Jeff Beck has played with just a who's who in the drumming world. So I started researching a little bit more about Steve back in those years. And he's just worked with everybody. Mike and the Mechanics, the great Mike Rutherford. Anastacia has been his gig recently for several years. He worked with the great Lennox, of course, Jeff Beck. And Steve and I have been following each other on social media for quite some time. And I reached out to him and said, hey man, let's do an episode of the Drum Shuffle. And he was so gracious with his time and said, yeah, of course, let's do it. And we had just a wonderful conversation. And I know that you're going to get a lot out of this, and you couldn't ask to talk to a nicer guy than Steve. So please help me welcome to the Drum Shuffle, Steve Barney. Hey, good afternoon, Steve. How are you, brother?
I am very, very well. Thank you very much for calling me.
Oh, no, man. Thank you for taking the time to come on the Drum Shuffle. We really appreciate it. As we were kind of talking, when I first called, we're glad that you're taking the time to do it. How are things over in the UK? Everybody doing well?
Listen, man, my family and my friends, we're all kind of well. Everyone's keeping safe, and obviously, it's a challenging time to put it kind of simply, but it's ultimately we're just looking after ourselves and being safe and being kind of mindful of each other and mindful of what we do, and also hopeful, man, of getting back out there, hitting some drums for a really loud PA and making people sing again,
Yeah, man, no doubt. I mean, as we say here in the American South, from your lips to God's ears, we're all anxiously awaiting that coming back. And as we're, recording this interview, it's the first part of 2021. And, we've got, vaccinations out there now. And, we're all hopeful that by the end of this year, there's going to be some return to normalcy for us musicians to get out there and do some shows,
Absolutely, man. I ain't going to lie, man. I miss it massively, as I'm sure millions of people do around the world. And, there's many points of view on what's going on. I know how I feel about it, and I'm going to act accordingly with that. And I'm just ready to kind of go back out there and entertain people as and when we can,
Absolutely. And, the sooner the better, because we're all missing it. Music is such a healing force in the world, and we need more of it. That's all I'm going to say, So,
yeah, man. Amen to that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Steve, as is kind of the tradition here on the Drum Shuffle, we like to start at the beginning of your career and what got you into drumming in the first place. Now, I know that kind of that seminal moment for you was going to a Genesis concert as a youngster. What do you remember about that? And what was it about, the great Phil Collins and Chester Thompson that made you say that night, this is what I want to do?
Well, I was already kind of showing an interest in playing drums at that age. And Genesis came through a local kind of seaside town to Norwich in Norfolk, where I live, a place called Great Yarmouth. And my uncle Roger, had to camp all night to get tickets because it was long before, you could order tickets online or Ticketmaster or whoever, Yeah. So he was there with a flask of coffee and a sleeping bag and kind of a frozen nostrils in the street, kind of trying to get tickets. So even as a young kind of person that I was at the time, the fact that he got those tickets, I already knew, even though I didn't know that much about Genesis at all, because like I say, I was only 9 years old, that I knew that it was almost like the golden ticket from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. The fact that he'd got 3 of these golden Genesis tickets to see this band that my dad and my uncle was so excited to see. So, yeah, I mean, we went, and it was a small, I say small, like for Genesis, who were like an arena band at the time, for them to be doing a theatre tour of the UK was a big deal.
Yeah.
And it was, I can't remember how many dates that tour was, but yeah, I went along, and it was just, to see Phil and Chester that night. I remember it so vividly, even here as a 50-year-old man today. It was just an incredible kind of sight and sound. And, I was just blown away by what I remember was the energy and the precision and the power from the PA. I remember the smell of alcohol on old man's beards next door to me with leather jackets on. But ultimately, all joking aside, which I do a lot, there was something special that happened that night that I was almost it was religious for me.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily a religious guy, but I felt I was in church that night, and something about seeing that band, and in particular Phil Collins drumming and the way he played with such authority, and Chester, was just really special. And they just became my favourite band, and a band that I saw many, many times during the 80s, and early 90s.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, so, I mean, I know that was kind of that moment for you, and everybody has the what I call the aha moment, where it's your future is written in that moment. I'm going to do this kind of thing. Did you immediately, start asking for drums, and did you do any sort of formal school education around the instrument, or was it more of a, hey, buy me a snare drum and I'm going to figure this out sort of path?
So gradually, I think it was so lucky that my father definitely noticed that there was a strong interest from me, and he didn't push me at all. He just he enthused me really, and whether it be listening to his record collection, which was often blasting in the house, bands like Genesis, obviously, but Pink Floyd and Zeppelin and Rainbow and Deep Purple. And, just obviously all those bands have got great drummers. So I was always in an environment where my dad was playing music, and I would often play along to stuff with biscuit tins, just anything I could on furniture and stuff. But eventually, we did get sort of some drums handed down, and is kind of, when I say handed down, from family, friends or something. I remember this old kind of UK Salvation Army drum kit that I think my dad's uncle Harry owned, and it was just a snare drum and a hi-hat and a bass drum, and that was it. But that was kind of all you needed, and kind of all you need really to get the groove going, isn't it? And and I guess I kind of started with that, and then my dad, definitely coming out of the other side of seeing Genesis, knew that there was a big thing for me. Yeah, and I did have drum lessons. There was a local drummer called Slim Harris who taught me to play, and I was with him for about 4 years. And it was a mixture of having lessons with him, but also playing records. So playing along to records in my bedroom as a kid. There was no YouTube. There was no kind of regular TV shows or DVDs that you could rewind and watch it over and over again. There was just, I used to immerse myself with the headphones and playing along to my favorite albums, trying to mimic my favorite drum grooves or my favorite drum songs, mainly that being Genesis. I would especially remember an album called Seconds Out by Genesis that I think Bill Bruford is on as well as Chester. And then there was a great live record called Three Sides Live, and I would just play along to it the best I could. And whenever the crowd kind of cheered at the end of the song, I would kind of, in my mind, imagine that it might be for me one day,
Yeah. Well, it's a very similar path that I took. I never really pursued the formal lessons, but when people ask me now, hey, I want to learn to play drums, what do I do? And it's hard for the younger generation to understand a time before the internet, or before YouTube or whatever. But I tell everybody, just find your favorite record, CD, MP3, whatever it is, play along to it. You will develop a great sense of time, and you'll understand what works and what doesn't. I think that's a great way to learn.
I think so, mate. And I just, it gave me the freedom just to express myself. I definitely was in a household where we didn't live in a big home, and we were in what's called like a semi-detached house. So we did have a neighbour one side. I think it was an older woman who, bless her, it probably wasn't the greatest noise coming through. Do you know what I mean? And she was very forgiving to a point, although she did eventually move. I do remember that. But my dad and my mum, they were never the type of people to bang on the door going, you need to turn that down. They never, I'm so lucky in what we might think is the traditional thing that parents will tell their kids to kind of keep the noise down or listen, you want to think about getting a real job. My dad has never done that. He's been quite the opposite. I mean, I remember when I did leave school, and for a short time I got a job in a men's clothes shop. My dad was really disappointed. He was really sad. I mean, I was like, Dad, I've got a job, and like he never fell out with me over it, but there was a look in his eye that was like, really? I think he thought and felt that if he had half the talent that I was showing at that age, that he would have run with it, and followed his dream. And I don't think, in looking back, he was right. He wanted me to fulfill the opportunities that lay ahead if I wanted them, and thankfully he was right,
Yeah. Well, I mean, having that support system is so important. And we've had that conversation on this show a lot of times, and that is oftentimes people discount art. And that is, if a youngster is saying, hey, I want to pursue a career in the arts, beauty being in the eye of the beholder, or good artistic merit in the eye of the beholder. Yes. And a lot of people always talk about plan B. You should have something to fall back on. But having a dad that's saying, hey, Steve, you're talented. You need to really chase this thing. Do your thing. That's an amazing blessing to have that coming from your parents.
Really? I mean, my dad, and I'm not going to swear because I don't think your show is that type of show, but he was
no. Say whatever you want on this show, brother. You say whatever you want.
In that case, my dad was like, fuck plan B. He was like, fuck plan B, fuck plan C, and fuck plan D. You got to make plan A work. And whether that is the right thing to do in life, but he was like, and I respect and definitely understand people that might want to go and have different options. But there is something to be said in life for running with plan A only. And that is the only option, And I'm not saying that I wouldn't never, look down upon anyone that, say, plays drums and has to take up a second or third job. I'm not that type of person. But if you're able to run with plan A, then that's a great option as well, I think, for your life.
Yeah. I mean, I think whether it's, drumming or ballet or, it doesn't matter what it is, or even if it's being a mechanic, if that's what you want to do, having the attitude of failure not being an option, the perseverance factor, I think that's important. I mean, it really is. And I agree with you. I would never say to somebody, don't have a plan B, because it's always nice to have, an escape route, right? But I think if you just go into anything with failure is not an option for me, that's a good thing, I think.
Yeah. It certainly can work that way as well. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I agree.
Well, so as a youngster, did you start, we refer to it here in the States as garage bands, were you, hooking up with, mates from school and kind of doing the jamming thing at somebody's house? Were you doing all that good stuff?
I ended up, just to sort of summarize that time of my life. So after, around that time when I'd been in, having drum lessons, I did start to go in for I guess they're called talent shows, which would be the same in the US, and just going in for shows where I actually played on a local theatre. And my dad had a friend who played kind of organ, and we ended up putting this medley together. And I went in for this talent show and did a little drum solo at the end of it. And I think we played Hawaii 5-0 was in the medley.
Oh, nice.
And maybe Wipeout and The Whitest Shade of Pale. It's kind of put together for me almost. And I just did a little solo at the end, which probably was just like any 10-year-old would do, would just go absolutely bananas. No kind of composition, just literally throwing everything that you could at the drums. But that was a great experience to be on stage at such a young age and at least, get some applause. I mean, not that I do it for the applause, but just to get feedback was lovely. And I met some young musicians during that time, which we then put a band together called Starburst. And we played on, I guess, what we would call the local cabaret and kind of pub circuit. So I know we were a young band, but we were playing local kind of summer seasons, which we would call, holiday camps and live sort of rooms within holiday camps where you could play. And basically, at quite a young age, in my early teens, I was able to play in front of an audience and just what we say over here, kind of cut our teeth, which means you kind of make mistakes and you play in front of people as much as possible. So, I was out at quite a young age and earning a small amount of money from it, which felt kind of nice again, and almost kind of oh, hang on, so I can hit this. If I hit this concert tom and this floor tom, someone gives me a pound, or I mean, it doesn't happen that they give you a pound every time you hit a drum, because I'd be a millionaire by now, which I definitely am not. But no, so in answer to your question, I played an awful lot in cabaret bands and pub bands and local bands throughout my teens. And all the time I stayed in Norwich, in Norfolk, my hometown, playing in original bands and playing in, basically just trying to get to a point where I thought, when I left school and passed that job that I was in, that I might get in a band that might have a record deal. That was the dream. I never had it in my sights to be a freelance session drummer as such and be someone that would play for different artists. I always associated that with reading, and I couldn't and can't read drum music, by the way, even though I had lessons. That's a kind of a longer kind of answer, really. But I found playing by ear was my more natural way of playing,
Yeah, for sure.
But when I left, I ended up feeling I'd reached as far as I could go in the city that I'd grown up in. I started to look further afield, and in 1994, I answered an advert for a band from Liverpool called Buddy Rag. It was like a heavy rock crossover, kind of funk, punk, reggae, hip hop band. A bit like if you remember a band called Fishbone. Do you remember Fishbone?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Fishbone and early Chili Peppers and the energy of that early 90s kind of alternative rock. And this Liverpool band had that in kind of a great kind of way. And I kind of heard their demo, and I kind of moved up to Liverpool within 2 weeks and took a real leap of faith. And that was, that was in 1994. And here I am, 2001, and I'm still in Liverpool. So it kind of worked out,
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I know that band, I know you guys had signed with a label, and at some point, you stopped that relationship with the label, and that kind of opened up the world that you live in now of being, sort of a session guy or, a hired gun sort of guy playing with many different artists. And I say this all the time, because, my situation is I never really left the band that I played in that almost made it, right? We have maintained a working relationship for, 30 plus years. But there are huge periods of inactivity, and I fill those periods of inactivity doing session work. And much like you, I don't read. I'm self-taught. But I think a lot of people think, okay, I'm in a band, we signed a record deal, and that didn't work out. So now somehow that is a failure, when in most cases, that's really what opens up the door to some real artistic freedom. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, my time in Bullywag was not restrictive, and it was a great learning curve. They were very, very strong characters as musicians and as human beings, And Norwich, from where I'm from originally, compared to Liverpool, is a very, very different city. So moving to Liverpool is quite an edgy city, and the personalities of people here is quite edgy. So I had to kind of grow up, to be honest with you. And musically, the guys at Bullywag were incredible. They were great musicians, so it was a real schooling for me. But yeah, when we made the one and only album which we made, and we did get a record deal, so to me that was success that some people have never had. I was lucky to get a record deal, and we toured, a lot for about 2 years with that band, opening for lots of really big name artists. But sadly, it didn't happen like we hoped it would, And when the band did disband and we broke up, it was I was lost for a little while. I don't mind admitting it. I was kind of, when you put all your eggs, talking about plan A, that was my plan A, was being in a band. Mm-hmm. And I never thought about being a session guy, but coming out of it, again, you kind of look at who you've met and people that you've hung out with in that time. And because we were in different studios and different settings, I was meeting a lot of people that could, I guess when I came out of the band, realised could be quite beneficial to me as a freelancer if they would give me an opportunity to show that. And that doesn't happen overnight, because often when people know of you as being a band drummer and you're asking about session work, they don't see you as that guy, because one, you don't have any track record as being someone that's done that. So at some point, really, we need someone to give us just trial us out, take a chance on us, really. And thankfully, I did have a couple of guys that did give me those opportunities when Bullywag broke up. There was a producer I'd met called Andy Wright. He was quite famous for working with a band called Simply Red over here, amongst many others. And a guy called Al Stone. And they gave me an opportunity to work with this up-and-coming singer, who sadly, the album never came out, but the session guys that played on it were all pretty established. And I was kind of like the odd man in the room, because no one knew me, but hopefully my drummer did the job, and it wasn't sort of long after that I got my first kind of freelance pop gig, really, there was a girl pop group that was pretty big in Liverpool called Atomic Kitten. It was pop music, in a very far left field from where I'd been in this rock band, alternative rock band, Bullywag. But that kind of put me on a TV show in the UK called Top of the Pops, which you may or may not have heard of.
Oh, sure.
It was a very, very popular show for us here. And it's almost kind of like, we kind of joke as a musician, if you played on Top of the Pops, you've made it, So I got to do that with the girls. And not long after that, they brought in a musical director to help put their tour together. And what I found out later on is that musical directors usually come into a job bringing in their own musicians. But on this one occasion, this guy that I met called Mike Stevens gave me an opportunity to kind of hear what I was like, and thankfully kept me on for that particular tour.
Yeah.
And that was a great learning curve for me, Jamie. I was there with a click track and playing, pop songs, but it was a lot more involved than I thought. Just because something you say the word pop, certain people might think that doesn't involve any great musicianship, but it takes a particular headspace to learn and copy kind of songs off a record and replicate them on a live stage.
Well, yeah, and as you mentioned, playing along with a click, and there's a lot of choreography with lights and videos and samples, and it's a very involved kind of gig, and one that quite frankly I don't know that I could pull off without a lot of work, but I'm assuming that gig opened up a lot more doors for you. And, I think we're getting ready to get into the meat of your career, if you will, because
we are, man. Yeah.
That led to some other pretty, how do I say it? Astounding opportunities, right?
Yeah, man. I mean, coming off the Atomic Kitten gig, I got a call from Andy Wright, the guy that I'd spoke about just before, who'd checked me out playing with that artist. And he phoned me and said, "Hey, Steve, how you doing?" I said, "Great. I've just wrapped up this first pop tour I've done with Atomic Kitten." He's like, "Oh, great." He said, "Funnily enough, I'm going to be working on their next single." I said, "Oh, wow. That's a small world, Andy." He says, "But I'm not ringing about that. I'm ringing about to let you know I'm working on a new album with an artist that I think it'd be great to play, on some tracks for in the studio." I said, "Oh, great stuff, Andy." Presuming that he was going to say it was an up-and-coming new artist or someone that had just been signed or something that he had that he thought I'd be right for. But it turns out, he said, "Do you remember I did Jeff Beck's last album?" I said, "Yeah, great. Incredible record, yeah." Thinking that he was going to say that there was somebody involved in that album that we were going to be doing a session for. And he said, "Yeah, so this is for Jeff's new album." I said, "What?" He said, "No, I want you to play on Jeff Beck's new album." I was like, "Wow, are you kidding me?" He said, "Mate, you'd be perfect for it." And immediately, like yourself and every drummer or musician that would be listening, we all know the list of incredible names that we've all been influenced and we all look up to, especially drummers with Jeff, is the who's who, from Vinny to kind of Terry Bozzio to Andy Gangadin to Simon Phillips to Narada Michael Walden. I could go on forever. Yeah. And then he's ringing me, Steve Barney from Norwich, to play, But he said, "Listen, before you talk yourself down," he said, "this album is not a fusion rock album. This is a very modern sound and kind of almost from a rhythm point of view would be more like The Prodigy and Chemicals and big, heavy, funky kind of hip-hop loops." And he says, "Hearing how you played with Bullyrag, this is exactly what is needed for the album." So I took my drums down there. It was a couple of weeks later, and I played on a half dozen songs on that album, which was out in 2003, and I got on really well with Jeff in that period, and it was it was an amazing thing to be able to do.
Well, I mean, that's certainly when you first kind of appeared on my radar. I was like, "Oh man, who's this guy playing with Beck?" Because as you said, he's had a royal list of drumming, just idols that he's played with over the years. But, I can only imagine what that must have been like walking into a studio and there sits Jeff Beck. I mean,
insane, man.
Yeah. I mean, you've got to pinch yourself a couple of times, right?
Man, I had bruises. I was. There was that many pinches. I was covered in bruises, man. I think my wife. I think my wife thought I'd been beaten up. No. All joking aside, mate, it was a complete and utter pinch moment. And it actually happened the other way around. It wasn't I walked in the studio and there was Jeff Beck. Andy had got me in early in the morning, set my drums up. We got the drums sounding really good in this particular studio we were in, and I'd already kind of put a load of stuff down on one track for Jeff to hear. So there I was in the live drum room, kind of giving a take. And all of a sudden I look up and there is the great Jeff Beck looking at me through the glass,
Wow.
And there I am playing on his music. And he's kind of giving me great vibes and sort of thumbs up in the air. And he was lovely, man. He was great. But what kind of happened while I was there, which was just unexpected, and the icing on the cake, is that while we were maybe a day or two into the sessions that we were doing there, that Jeff came in one morning saying that he'd been contacted by the Royal Festival Hall venue in London, which is a great, very, very prestigious venue, for him to do a 3-night career retrospective of his career, celebrating his career with various artists who he's either had played on his records or he's guested on their records. And I was like, wow, Jeff, amazing, man. I'm going to grab a ticket for that. That sounds like a fantastic thing that sounds like a great gig to come and see. He says, well, I was going to ask you, did you want to be the house band drummer for the whole thing? I was like, you kidding? Now, who knows? I might be just being polite and talking myself down, but, he'd just met me a few days earlier, and there he was offering me this kind of house band scenario. And, and it was just, I didn't know initially if it was just because I was there and he was being polite. And, sometimes artists might say a certain thing because you're there and they would be embarrassed not to say anything to you. But no, it turns out the manager contacted me the next day and said Jeff did want to offer me that job, which of course I said yes to. But when I went back to Liverpool with a handful of CDs and the set list, it was quite, I was in awe of the situation, and I don't mind admitting, because I did end up doing the shows. But I don't mind admitting to you and your listeners that a few weeks into practicing the stuff at home, I did actually get to a point where I kind of talked myself almost mentally out of the gig, because the pressure of doing that stuff felt like the pressure of failure. Yeah, I couldn't comprehend, and I think I wasn't one for just talking myself out of a great opportunity. It's just I knew that the Jeff Beck material, as a lot of your friends here will know, was pretty in depth. But I did actually call the manager, and I was almost kind of talking myself out of the gig. And he kind of quickly put my mind at rest by saying, listen, don't sweat it. The heavyweight fusion stuff can be shared between yourselves. And to be honest, he said Terry Bozzio has just agreed to come over from the States to do a guitar shop reunion with Jeff and Tony Hymas. So to be honest, when I heard that kind of took the pressure off me doing the heavyweight, sort of time signature stuff. Yeah. So I did end up doing the gig, and it was absolutely a wonderful experience, as you can imagine. We had John McLaughlin as a special guest from the Mahavishnu Orchestra. We had Roger Waters from Pink Floyd.
Man.
We had Paul Rodgers from Bad Company and Free. A great singer called Imogen Heap, who you might be familiar with. Jimmy Hall. I don't know if you know Jimmy Hall. He's from Nashville. Don't know if he was in a band called Wet Willie. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Absolutely. Southern rock stuff.
So it was just, and there I was, and there was Terry Bozzio, and we played independently of each other, and we also played together on some stuff. And I have to thank Terry. He was and is one of my heroes, but he was such a relaxer and confidant and helpful guy to me on that gig. He could see that. I think he could see that I was there for a reason. I could definitely play the drums, and I wouldn't have been anywhere near that gig unless I could play drums. But he could see that I was a little kind of in awe of the situation. So I have to thank Terry Bozzio for being so cool with me and helping me. But yeah, man, those 3 shows are very, very special.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can only imagine. It's what an honor, right? And so now, looking at your career, after doing something like that, your name is now attached to the name of Jeff Beck and Terry Bozzio and Roger Waters and Paul Rodgers. I can only imagine that all of a sudden will open some further doors in one's career, correct?
Correct, absolutely. And going back a couple of years, when I mentioned to you about this pop band, Atomic Kitten, that I was doing, the musical director that I met doing that, the London-based musical director, who I got on really well with and do still get on really well with, I was really proud that I'd got the Jeff Beck gig for obvious reasons. And I make no bones about it. Mike's a friend of mine, and I knew he loved Jeff Beck. But I really wanted Mike to see me play with Jeff Beck because, one, he was my friend and I wanted him to enjoy it. But two, I thought I really wanted him as a musical director to see what I could achieve there. And in retrospect, looking back, that was the right thing for me to do, because 6 months after those Jeff Beck shows, Mike called me out of the blue, and says, "Hey, I've been put forward to musically direct a gig with a new artist." And I said, "Oh, sorry, he didn't say new artist. He said a new gig for a new tour for an artist." I said, "Oh, great. Who's that?" And he said, "Annie Lennox from the Eurythmics." I was like, "Wow." And he says, "Mate, I saw you. I sat there and watched you playing with Jeff Beck, and I really think you'd be great for this Annie tour." And I was like, "Wow, Mike, that would be so, be such an honor, because Annie's one of my favorite voices, as I'm sure she is for all of your listeners. She's such an icon, you know what I mean, for all the work she did with the Eurythmics, with Dave Stewart and solo. So there I was put forward to Annie's first ever solo tour, which was in 2003, and there wasn't an audition. I had to just go around to Annie's house with Mike and meet her, and we listened to her album, and she sort of talked through some of the tracks, and she asked me what she sort of didn't ask me about my drumming or anything, but she's interested what I'd been doing most recently. And of course I could say I'd just done some shows with Jeff Beck and played on Jeff Beck's new album. So that carried some weight. I mean, with no disrespect to Atomic Kitten, it was a great pop band, but that would not have had the same impact if I would have said those words to her, So
right.
You're absolutely right. The fact that I could say and share with her that I'd done the Jeff Beck stuff really did hold me in kind of more rock royalty kind of way.
Sure. And, I think the most interesting thing about that, when you said there wasn't really an audition, I had to go to Annie's house and talk to her. We talk about this on this show all the time. It's not necessarily about your drumming ability. It's about the ability to live with other humans for the next 10 months in a very confined space. And, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Annie Lennox had been told, "Hey, Steve's your guy. He's a great drummer. He's going to be fine." She wanted to make sure she could live with you during that tour. That is every bit as important as your drumming ability. Yes?
If not more so than the drumming. I think it's a given, if your name has been put in the hat, that you can play drums, you can sing, you can play guitar. That's a given that's come to her. But you're absolutely right. She would have been around and toured a lot at that point. And I guess she wanted to just see you, like face to face, and get a vibe for you, because people are very intuitive about whether they like you straight away or not. I mean, interestingly enough, I remember saying goodbye to her. And funnily enough, I was going to the NAMM show the next day. So Mike kind of dropped me off at Heathrow Airport. And as we drove to the airport, he says, I don't know what to make of that. I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "I couldn't tell if she loved you or hated you." And it wasn't confusing. Maybe what he meant, I don't think hate was kind of meant by that. But I think what he meant was that he couldn't read if it was a given that she absolutely loved me or didn't or whatever. But then while I was over at the NAMM show, Mike did actually call me from the UK and tell me that I'd got the job. So that I remember that as well, being so over the moon with that phone call to say I'd been given the Annie Lennox kind of gig, It was so, her music covers so many bases musically, and the whole thing is just driven by that wonderful vocal that she has,
Yeah, for sure.
No, but that really was one of my favorite, if not favorite, artists that I've worked with. I've done 4 tours with Annie, and it's been such a memorable thing to look back upon. I mean, she doesn't tour anymore, but the stuff we did was so kind of heavy for me to remember that I'll be forever in. Well, Mike's debt for calling me for it, and Annie's for liking me.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, I mean, so Jeff Beck, Annie Lennox. I mean, you've got 2 of the biggest names in the history of British music on your resume. And, obviously now that you have those two names on your resume, I would view Steve Barney as an A-list session drummer now, right? And I know that you've, recently have been doing a lot of stuff with Anastacia.
That's right, yeah.
Which just an amazing artist as well. But you've also got Mike and the Mechanics, on your resume, Mike Rutherford, which kind of puts a nice bow on that whole Genesis thing, doesn't it?
Oh man, can you imagine how I felt when I got the call to do the Mike Rutherford, Mike and the Mechanics tour? That was actually in 2017, so we're fast forwarding quite a bit. But yeah, that was through Gary Wallace, who's been Mike and the Mechanics' drummer for about 25 years, and he still is. So Gary was, I think there was a slight double booking of Tom Jones, that he also plays drums and is the musical director for Tom Jones. But Gary couldn't do this Mike and the Mechanics tour, and had seen me play with Anastacia in London, I think in late 2016, and really liked my drumming. And again, Mike was looking for someone to dep Gary. He'd had two great drummers that had depped Gary in the past, but I think for whatever reason, he wanted to try something else again. And Gary put my name forward, so I didn't have an audition with Mike. It was under the recommendation of Gary Wallace, which I have to thank Gary for that, But that was a great experience, and I have to say, it took me a while to kind of get out of my own way, if you know what I mean, because I couldn't hide the fact. I didn't have to hide the fact, but I couldn't. The fact that Mike was there on the stage that night in Great Yarmouth in 1980, and there I was in 2016 or 17 in a rehearsal room with him. It took me I guess it took me a good week or two to truly not look at him without the kind of fan in my eye. You know what I mean? But I was there for a reason, and I'm really proud of the way I played with him, and they were great songs, and we played a few Genesis songs, which was just lovely, So that was a really nice, you're absolutely right. That was a nice bow on that whole Genesis story thing, And going back to Anastacia, man, I mean, I've been with her since 2009. So of all the artists that I've been fortunate enough to play with, Anastacia is the person I've probably done the most shows with out of everybody.
Yeah, and I think that's probably an interesting angle to take on this. An artist like Anastacia, you have been with her for quite some time. What is I want to make sure I ask this question the proper way and it doesn't seem insensitive, but
yeah, man,
what is the process like? She puts out a record, right? And you guys go do a tour. She is not an artist that immediately goes back into the studio to do the next record. There is,
true.
There's typically a cycle to it. So when you wrap up with Anastacia after your first tour and you don't really know what's coming next, do you sit at home waiting for the phone to ring for that next process to begin, or do you go do other things? I guess I'm asking that question more generally than very specifically to Anastacia, but in that situation, what do you do between album and tour cycles with a huge pop artist like her?
Well, I guess, you do two things. One thing is that for any self-employed musician, you need to be careful with your funds and not do the end of a tour, go and blow all your money and actually have nothing to live on. So I know you didn't ask that question, but it is connected to what you're asking, is that we have to be careful financially. And that's not taught to you as a musician. You need to be careful and not come home and blow everything that you've earned, So there's been a mixture of things with her, that you keep your ear to the ground with her and her management about when it's likely to be another cycle. I mean, after her first tour that I did with her, I then started playing with a boy band in the UK called The Wanted, who I did a theatre tour with. And very quickly, pop kind of boy bands can do. They ended up getting pretty big, and within a kind of year, 18-month cycle, we were playing an arena tour in the UK. And I did for a short time, because there was way more work with the boy band than there was with Anastacia. I had to put a dep in to cover me on some gigs of hers that I couldn't do. And for whatever reason, I was very lucky. Well, I say whatever reason, she was very loyal to me. And when the gigs came around again, and I was always asked to come back and do them, I didn't, because sometimes when you miss an artist's kind of opportunity to work with them and you do something else, they could be very offended by that and not understanding, and you don't get the call again because you said no.
Yeah.
But that so far has not happened to me with her, which I really am grateful for. And it's not happened often, but when there's a lot of work with another artist, you can't just, sometimes schedules and diaries work really well together and you manage to not let anybody down, but sometimes you do, But getting answer to your question, I mean, I don't teach drums, so I don't have that to fall back on. I have had kind of bits and pieces of studio work. I don't have my own studio. I've worked in many different London studios over the years, but I certainly wouldn't call myself a first call London session drummer, even though I have a pretty good CV of some recordings that I played on. But I don't think anyone apart from a few, is saying that the recording thing is what it was. It's changed very much now, So yeah. I guess, mate, it's been a mixture of luck, saving money for when things are quieter, and kind of spending time at home with my family, which is not to be forgotten. That I don't want to just tour 12 months a year and not see my wife and my son grow up, So there's been I was fortunate after a while that there was a balance of me seeing my son grow up and being at home while my wife was at work, and I would turn into professional dad again and forget how to play drums, and then 6 months later I have to remind myself what to do again,
Yeah. Well, and I think, I've never been in that situation. And we all make decisions in our life, but when my daughter was born, the decision for me was pretty easy, and it was, I can't be gone, 10 months a year playing music, and that's okay. That's the decision I made for myself, and that's what worked best. It's not like my phone was ringing off the hook for tours anyway, but had I been placed in that situation, I don't know that I could have said, sure, I'll go on a 10-month tour or whatever, 200 nights next year. But with that being said, it is so important to point out that, sometimes we as music listeners lose sight of the fact that all of these people that are out there touring around all the time have loved ones back home that they don't see very often, right?
That's true, man. That's true.
And you have to find some sort of work-life balance in any career, and music is no different than that.
Absolutely. And I think, unfortunately, some people don't find the balance because, through no fault of their own, that being a self-employed freelance world that is always reliant on saying yes when the phone rings, that many of us are scared to say no to a job unless you're in a financial position to do so, So a lot of people, if they do get a tour and they're promising their families to come home and then another tour was being kindly offered, they're almost scared to say no financially and no, as a sort of a career path. But so there is, I think, unfortunately, some families don't kind of make it when people are constantly on the road, So I'm certainly not perfect in that world, and I've always tried to strike a balance. I've got a very understanding wife, to say the least, and she's been very supportive of what I do, and we've just done our best to try and find a balance with it all,
Yeah, it's a difficult thing for a lot of folks, and it's not just musicians. I mean, you could be an architect or, I don't know, a graphic designer, a mechanic, whatever. If you're, doing, 75, 80 hours a week and never coming home, well, that usually causes a rub in relationships. And I think,
yeah, man.
And I think it's even worse for guys that are like, okay, it's, it's May 2nd. I'm leaving. I'll see you guys at Thanksgiving. Man, that's hard, right?
That is hard. Yeah, absolutely. And it's down to lots of things. I guess it's down to your partner being okay with it first and foremost. I mean, if he or she's not going to be okay with it, then that's going to be a tricky situation. But I can only speak for myself, and I've been very lucky that we've sort of managed to find the balance, albeit not perfect all the time, but I guess we have found a balance. And it's not like, I mean, the thing is, when someone like you is kind enough to ring me and we talk about my career, it can, because we're putting kindly all the kind of career highlights I've done together. So it might sound like I'm always working and I've always been busy. But in truth, there's been times when I'm wondering if the phone is going to ring again. And I've not always been sort of feeling, and I know it's not maybe the cool thing to admit to the public, but, God, man, I'm just a real person. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, I mean, I am Steve Barney. I'm not Steve Gadd. You know what I mean? And I'm very, very proud of the work I've done. But I want to give your listeners some sort of reality to my reality as well. And I don't know. It's a balance, man. It is a balance. But I wouldn't change anything for the world. I'm so lucky to have done all what I've done. And even with the year that we find ourselves in, that I've been so fortunate to look back in a retrospective way and go and take stock for a minute and go, wow, man, you really have achieved a lot of stuff that you would have never have dreamt of, whether it be, I played the Madison Square Gardens, I've played, I played the Hollywood Bowl, I've played in front of 3 men and a dog in an English pub. I've kind of done the extremities. I've been signed by a major record label. I've been dropped by a major record label. I've played on my mum and dad's sofa as a drum kit, but then I've been lucky enough to have a great endorsement with Natal. And what I'm saying is that I've been, I've had a great, I mean, this just because we're in this situation we're all in at the moment, which is a forced pause in this industry that we're all in, but it does give me a moment to take stock of how lucky I've been,
Absolutely. And, I mean, I've been asked questions, by folks that, the question comes up, oh, well, you played on, 3 records last year, but nothing this year. What happened? Well, maybe I did play on 3 records this year that all got buried. That never got released. I mean, so there are so many things that go into the optics of how busy we all are, right? And what we've done. But it's always good for every musician to look back and go, what have I accomplished? Wow, it's a lot. What do I still want to accomplish? And then you figure out how to work towards those goals. So, to put you on the spot here, COVID be damned, but, what's next for Steve Barney? What is left for you to do?
I would love to continue doing the live work that I've been doing, and when touring can return in whatever form that is going to be, I'd like to think that I'm going to be out there with my drums doing it. That is my plan, and that is my intention. I would, as far as what else would Steve Barney like to do? I'm focusing on my family and not on my career, although it is actually connected. I would really like to move home. Me and my wife and my son want to move to somewhere slightly bigger as a family, to have a bigger family home for us as a family. But equally, I would love to have, and I've always dreamt of having, a drum space where I can actually, out the back or, as an extension on the house, have the ability to practice drums and keep my hand in regularly. And also, at some point have a home studio, which I can offer my services from, because I don't have that option at the moment. And I know lots of guys and girls in the world do. So that's something that I would like to do. But at the moment, I don't have that ability. But that is, that's my goal, and that is my dream, that in this kind of next year that we're in, that I hope within the next 12 months that I would have moved kind of home into a bigger family home. And, well, listen, man, I still have my health, with all what's going on. I want to keep healthy, but,
right.
But definitely career wise, I'm not in a position, I'm not ready to hang my sticks up, even with all what I've done. There's kind of a lot left to do as far as I'm concerned. And if people are kind enough to give me a call for a job, then I am there, mate. I consider myself kind of ready to go, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
The sticks and the suitcase are at the door.
For sure. Yeah, and there's an old joke in there too that's like, you know, I've always got 7 pairs of socks in a suitcase waiting by the door, right?
Yeah, man. Just in
case the phone rings tomorrow. But well, you know, I mean, I want to be respectful of your time, and as we kind of get towards the end of our interview here, you know, I think you've given us a lot of food for thought, you know, and this has just been a great drum hang, and you know, your career speaks for itself. But one of our traditions here on the show is we always ask everybody for a good piece of advice, and you know, I mean, I could say that the whole interview has been a good piece of advice, but you know, you made a transition from being a band guy, and I think you kind of pointed to this earlier, to being more of a session artist. You know, what advice would you give to everybody out there who might be looking at that same sort of transition in their career?
I would say that for any up-and-coming drummer or musician and singer, you know, any artistic person, absorb yourself in as many kind of genres of music and styles that you consider yourself to enjoy and want to play. And while we can't be a master of all of them, I think it's good to at least be, you know, sort of check out every style of music you can and try and get it under your belt and enjoy that, you know. And while we can't necessarily do that at the moment, I would personally, for me growing up, it was try and play with as many people as you can in different scenarios, because while a gig may seem like it's just a small kind of garage band gig or a pub gig or something, or just a jam night, that you never know who's going to be within that night that you might meet, and that might lead to something down the road that you never would have connected to that jam night or that kind of garage band kind of night. And I would also say that while being a great, you know, musician is important, and to put the time in to get your chops together and to be comfortable playing with a click track and being mindful of what is happening around you musically, and not just, I think it's easy for us drummers to just focus on the drumming and be kind of technical and all the great technicalities that drums can do. But I think to listen to what's going on around you in the band and respond accordingly is very, very important, and not just put in that flashy feel because you just learned it last Friday and you want to put it in on the gig on the Monday because you've worked really hard on that really clever feel. But actually the song that you're playing has got nothing to do with that drum fill that you think is really clever. So what I'm trying to say is be respectful to the music and the musicians that you're playing with. And aside from the music, if you're fortunate enough to get on the road and touring, or, you know, traveling with other musicians, is that be mindful of other people's time and space, because when you're off stage, you're just human beings hanging out in a tour bus or a hotel or a airport together or backstage, and you have to be mindful of each other's personalities and feelings. You don't know what people are going through, whether they're missing family members, or there's been a bereavement, or they're just feeling sad, or they're happy, or they're drunk, or they've taken drugs. So what I'm saying is I think you just have to be mindful of everything that's going on around you, and best as you can, I think, try and bring a bit of humor and happiness into the working situation that you find yourself in. And that doesn't mean be a clown like I am. I think if people can smile and have a joke, then they will relax and you can bring out the best in people. But I guess what I'm trying to say is just be mindful of people around you and enjoy what you do, and realize that if you're lucky enough to get an opportunity, that you don't kind of miss that opportunity, and you just do your best, man. You know, that's all you can do. Do your best.
Yeah.
Enjoy life.
Yeah, man. That's the juice right there, Steve. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's what makes the world go round. And, you know, I've said, I don't know how many times on this show, you know, musically, oftentimes it isn't about the notes you play. It's about the notes you don't play. Right. And knowing, you know, knowing when the painting needs a little bit of orange paint and when it doesn't, right? I mean, that's the analogy I use. And the second part of that is don't be a dick.
Absolutely.
If you can just be a good human being and make the surroundings better for people, you're going to continually work in the business if you get that opportunity. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if you had been a miserable human being and overplayed, horribly on the Lennox tour, or, even going back to like Atomic Kitten or the Sugar Babes or whatever the case may be, any of those gigs, if you had overplayed and been a terrible human being on the tour, you would have ceased working.
That's true.
That's a fact. And
that's true, man.
The fact that you're such a joyous human being and giving of your time and, having a lighthearted streak, it has kept you busy for many, many years, and it will for many years to come.
I sincerely hope so. And thank you for saying that. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, listen, Steve, this has been such a great hang. We've got to do this again.
Please.
You're more than welcome on this show anytime, but
thanks, man.
Godspeed on this pandemic ending soon for all of us. But,
yeah, man.
When that next chapter opens up for you and you know what that's going to be, whether it's with Anastacia or another artist, drop us a line and let us know, and we'll get you on here to talk about it. I would love that.
Oh, man, I would love to do that, and I would definitely keep in touch. And thank you for reaching out. It's really good to speak to you and to speak to your listeners. And if anyone's got any questions about anything, then feel free to get in touch via yourself or I'm kind of on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, Barney Drums. Anyone can reach out to me, and I'm happy to help and advise anyone on anything, really,
Man, that's so generous of you. And that's what's cool about the drumming world is that we're all, it's like this large brotherhood, sisterhood of trying to help one another. We're not jealous like guitar players, right? I mean,
God, no. Screw them guys.
Oh, it's so good. But yeah, everybody reach out to Steve. He's a wealth of information and knowledge, and you heard it from his own mouth. He's happy to advise. So, we appreciate that, Steve. We'll have you back anytime, brother.
My pleasure, mate. It's really good to speak to you. Thank you, and keep safe. And and look out for the next time I call you.
Good deal, man. We're looking forward to it. Be safe out there, man.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, Jamie.
All right, guys and girls, that's going to wrap up episode 123 of the Drum Shuffle podcast. As always, a sincere thank you to Steve Barney for taking time out of his busy schedule to come on the show. We really did appreciate him doing so. And as he said in the interview, reach out to him. He is a super approachable guy and just has so much great advice to offer. And what an inspirational story, quite frankly. As I do each and every week, I'm going to thank all of you for tuning in. We simply cannot do this show without each and every one of you doing so week in and week out. I sincerely appreciate that. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you use to listen into the Drum Shuffle podcast. We have some interviews coming up that I promise you are not going to want to miss. I do have one announcement in that realm. We have confirmed that I will be speaking with the great, the marvelous Benny Greb coming up here in just a few days. So be looking for that episode in February, the great Benny Greb right here on the Drum Shuffle podcast. As always, we answer every single email that we get here at the Drum Shuffle. The email address for you to use is thedrumshufflepodcast@gmail.com. Our web address is thedrumshuffle.com. And of course, you can find more information about me over at jamieeads.com. You guys take care, stay safe out there, and until next time, may your head stay strong and your sticks never break. Cheers, everybody.